Okay, hello everybody. Today we'll be doing the second half of chapter 11, Athol Fugard's Tsotsi. For a moment, for the smallest, blinked fraction of the silence that passed as they eyed each other, there was fear in Boston. Then the defeat, the total and final defeat of his body, of him, of his manhood, was remembered, and he cared no longer, and his fear passed. He closed his eyes, and Tsotsi went back to his seat. It was better with his eyes closed. There were no irrelevances, like other faces or objects or colour, just his pain. "Why did you bring me here?" he asked. "I need to speak with you," Tsotsi said. If it had been the Boston of any other time, he would have sat up rigid in his bed, his eyes bright with excitement. Now he was no longer interested. All that had happened was too total, too final, and complete for him to retrace his steps back to some point along the way where he had still been stumbling to this moment. "Have you seen me?" "Ja." "You did it." A long silence, and then Tsotsi replied, "I felt you." "What is he saying?" "That he felt for me, Tsotsi?" A flicker of interest to his open eyes, and stared. And then, a second later, closed them again. What did it matter? "My youth," Boston said, saying it because he found the phrase on his lips, saying it because in the broken, shattered days that had passed since Tsotsi's attack, it had been in his mind constantly, evocative, charged with nostalgic pain. It had a meaning he couldn't even explain to himself. Tsotsi tried again. "I need to know things, Boston man." Boston listened in silence. "I need to know things. You must tell me." "Why me?" "You were a teacher, man. You read the books." Boston looked at Tsotsi carefully. Was it in the light? Was it in his eyes? There were lights in those eyes. Where there had been darkness, there was something like light. The effort tired him out. He closed his eyes. "I saw nothing." And Tsotsi, not knowing the nature of the ignorance of the other man, confessed, said, "I'll tell you." First of all, he told him about the baby, and Boston listened for a long time, piecing together the broken sentences, the half-thoughts of the other man, until he had the picture. Tsotsi and a baby. That was a strange thought. Could it not be true? Why not? Tsotsi was telling him, and Tsotsi, in all the time he had known him, had been totally without imagination. It must have happened. Why did it happen? What did it mean? Will it happen again? Why do things happen? He no longer heard the other's voice, his mind lost in the labyrinth of questions, until suddenly, like the image that rises cool and clear out of the concentric ripples widening away where a pebble has fallen in the water, rising cooler and clearer than ever before, came the thought and phrase again, so he said it aloud. "The fields of my youth." Tsotsi stopped and considered what Boston had said. What did it mean? What was he trying to say? What relevance was there between that sentence and the baby? He broke out into a sweat. "I know so little," he thought. "I know so little, I know nothing." And then, Boston man, there was the beggar. The man on the bed didn't move. "Boston man," he waited. "Hey, Boston." The beggar. Boston looked at him. "Help me there, man. I had him. Really, I had him right, but I let him go." Boston continued to watch him, so he told that story as well. Boston concentrated hard and listened. He heard that story right through to the end. In its way, it was as surprising as the other. Why was it so strange to find mercy? What a tremendous thought mercy was. The word itself is like a sigh of the wind. Where had he heard it like that? Then it came to him, the long, lonely wind that swept through the long grass in the fields of his youth. But this time he did not say it aloud. He looked at Tsotsi. He has clenched his hands in the attitude of prayer. He has beautiful hands. What is he saying? Yellow bitch. Memory of a mother? Tsotsi, a mother. Why not? All men came from women. I did. I never went back. She waited for me in the fields of my youth, standing there on her hoe in the midday sun, looking down the road. I never went back. Is she still waiting? What is Tsotsi saying? I never knew about it, not till yesterday. Like a long forgetting, you know. Tsotsi wiped the sweat away from his forehead. Boston had been staring a long time and said nothing. He went to the door and let the cool air pass over his body. He had told him everything, and it had been hard, not having to tell. That had come easy, driven as he was by some inner compulsion to know the meaning of the past 3 days and their strange events. A compulsion that had started with the baby and gained momentum ever since, until he no longer had a desire for anything else except to know. He had told his stories, and Boston had listened, and now he must ask his questions, and Boston must answer them. He turned back into the room, and fetching his chair, he sat down next to the bed. Boston, you've read the books. I've read books. So tell me, man, what does it mean? What? What I told you, Boston. Boston closed his eyes. We're sick, Tsotsi. All of us. We're sick. From what? From life. Tsotsi dropped his hand, and Boston felt the other man's anguish, and for a moment it was like a stab of pain that cut through his own, in which he was wrapped like a baby in its swaddling clothes. He stretched out an arm and touched Tsotsi, and waited for him to look at him. And then, into those eyes, those desperate eyes, he said, I don't know, Tsotsi. I know nothing. I am blind and deaf and almost dumb. My words are just noises, and I make them in my throat like an animal. Then he gripped Tsotsi's arm very tightly, because he was suddenly seeing something clearly, and it might help him to say it. You are different. Tsotsi bent forward. You are changing, Tsotsi. And then later, you mustn't be frightened. It happens, man. Tsotsi bent still closer, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees until their heads were only inches apart, and in that way he had only to whisper, as if frightened, that the very walls might hear, wanting his questions to pass as a final secret between Boston and himself. Why, Boston? Why did you do it? A sudden elation lit up Boston's face. He tried to smile, but his lips wouldn't move, and his nose started throbbing, but despite the pain he whispered back to Tsotsi, You are asking me about God. God, nodded Tsotsi. You are asking me about God, Tsotsi. About God. About God. Tsotsi sat back, keeping his silence then, and in the immediate moments after Boston had spoken, through the last hour of darkness, even when the candle spluttered and went out because it had burnt down to the wood, still silent when later Boston, who had gone his own way with his memories, remembering something clear as the note of a church bell, murmured the first line of a hymn. gentle Jesus, meek and mild. Silent through the last hour together, when the grey light in the room found them in the same attitudes, Boston on his bed, Tsotsi in his chair, silent finally when Boston had sat up in his bed and, looking through the window at the paling sky above him, said, "The green fields of my youth," giving a deep emphasis to green. Staying like that, leaning forwards, his arms stretched out before him, and then making his move to the door. Tsotsi followed him, and once tried to stop him. Boston shook off the hand. "I must get going, Tsotsi. I tell you it was green. Green, man. The grass in the fields of my youth. I must, man." Tsotsi looked at his nakedness and gave him trousers. He offered him sour milk and bread, but Boston refused. The last he saw of Boston was the figure of a man, stumbling, half running, down the street. Around him, the sun had cleared the cooling towers of the gasworks. It was a new day.